This is Brian, ScreenFiles.com in review. What I'm looking at today is 2021's Candyman, directed by DaCosta, which is a continuation of 1992's Candyman, directed by Bernard Rose. And this is a very interesting movie for me because it does some things very well, while conversely doing other things not so well. Let's look at what it does well for a moment. It expands the Candyman mythos in a really interesting way. It's so interesting, in fact, that I don't want to give it away. But it does some interesting things that broaden it and open up the space for a sequel, which would be Perilous Waters because sequel. That being said, it does this particular thing really cleverly. And I know that's vague, but as I said, I'm not going to tell you. And it's better if you don't know it. If you go into the movie fresh, you'll see this thing happen, and it's a wonderful thing. In the context of the character, it works really well. What doesn't work so well is that, looking back at Bernard Rose's 1992 movie, it revolved around a woman who was looking into the folklore of a character called the Candyman. And I don't recall the Clive Barker story was based on, though Bernard Rose's treatment of it made the people of Cabrini Green minor characters in their own story. This is one reason why diversity in filmmaking matters so much. The movie revolves around the people of Cabrini Green, who happen to be African American, and this being called the Candyman. Though the African American people are secondary in what should be their story. This tendency of marginalizing the people the movie is actually revolving around is not unusual when you deal with people who are other, who aren't part of the group they're making a movie about. And I enjoyed Bernard Rose's movie immensely, though I don't think it's aged particularly well. Though I did enjoy it. Though, as I said, it's not about black people. The antagonist, the Candyman, is black. And as I implied, it revolves around the lives of black people. But it is not about them. It is not their story. It's the story of a woman, a white woman, who is investigating the stories and the myths that came around Cabrini Green. The reboot makes the same mistake. Now, I don't tend to read reviews of movies I'm going to review because they tend to influence my thought. That being said, I saw a lot of positive buzz around Candyman, though one review in particular wasn't. So I gave it a scan. I didn't read it, I just kind of scanned through it. And one thing they said was that, which I agree with by the way, is that this movie marginalizes the people it's supposed to be about. And that's true. As I mentioned earlier, it was the same thing with Bernard Rose's movie, and it's the same thing with this movie. It talks about gentrification. It talks about the way black people are oftentimes treated in the United States. But it doesn't show us anything. I had wished, and this is where I agreed with that reviewer, I need to see more of these people's lives. Why not show us the lives of the people who actually lived in Cabrini Green? Show us the lives of the dispossessed and how the Candyman legend plays a role in their life. This movie does not do that. It takes an outsider in Yahya Abdul-Mateen II's character coming in. Now, keep in mind, he was actually born, based on the story of the movie, in Cabrini Green, based on the character from Bernard Rose's movie. But still, he's an outsider, and he brings an outsider's perspective to gentrification and so on and so forth. And that's not to say, as a black person himself, those views aren't valid. But they're excluding everyone who actually has to live in the situation. The movie makes a point of saying how his character is part of the gentrification that he is complaining about at one point. And that's true. Though the movie still could have given us a glimpse into their lives, into the lives of the people affected by gentrification, by white flight when times are bad, and gentrification when they improve. These are interesting stories, and I would have loved for the movie to have given us a glimpse of those people's lives. But it doesn't. Just like Bernard Rose's movie, it ignores the people who are at the center of it. It's a vexing and irritating tendency, made even more so when you take into account that two of the co-writers, as well as the director, are African Americans. They could have brought so much nuance and value to that discussion. They chose not to, for whatever reason. And that is a pity, because it's a missed opportunity. Another thing that's somewhat problematic is that this is not a particularly scary movie. It works with the conceit, if you recall Bernard Rose's movie, Candyman, to summon the Candyman, I should say, you would say his name 5 times into a mirror, and he would come. The thing of it is, in DaCosta's movie, she takes this concept of the mirror a little too far. From the opening credits, it's reversed, again, as if you're looking through a mirror. It's unnecessary and irritating, at least it was to me. And that could have been used to better build tension, which this movie has relatively little of. And another issue is that the characters behave in odd ways. When Abdul Mahin's character is stung by a bee earlier in the movie, let's say that the sting reacts to him adversely, which is to put it lightly. It literally causes his arm to almost like a gangrene type condition to set in. Yet it takes to virtually, I want to say, the last third of the movie for him to suddenly get the idea in his head that maybe I should go to the hospital for this. And I know that healthcare in the United States is pathetic by most standards. But at the same time, you'd have to see how ridiculously monstrous his arms started to look from this one bee sting. It was silly and unnecessary, and I think the narrative would have been better furthered by him going to the doctor earlier. And speaking of that sting, I mentioned earlier that the movie uses mirrors in ways that reflect what Candyman is about to do. You don't often see him directly. It tends to be through glass of some sort, be it a reflection or a window. Though his reaction to the bee sting, and its reaction to him, I should say, was the most ludicrous thing on earth. What would have made sense? Mirrors have that reaction not be something that anyone else could see. Have it just be able to be seen through the mirror. And this would make a lot of sense, because keep in mind, the mirrors were the doorways, if you will, into Candyman's world. It's what he exited from, and it's how he was able to move around places through mirrors, through glass. And Abdul Mahin II's character was changing into, was reflecting Candyman. So why couldn't that wound exist in that space? Why did it have to be visible to everyone, for that matter? And it was just so ridiculously overdone. If it were subtle, it'd be another matter. Since they weren't obviously going for subtle, then have it exist in that mirror space. Every time he looks in the mirror, he sees himself becoming Candyman, which the movie teased a little bit, but it could have been done more effectively. Have him see those physical changes happening. When he looks, that's what he sees, but nobody else sees it. It looks like he's going insane, and it furthers what the movie is trying to do. I mentioned earlier how this movie expands the mythos of Candyman. And I really want to tell you what it is, but I'm not going to, once again. But it's fascinating. And to have that wound not be visible to anyone else would have furthered that idea even more. 1992's movie was very scholarly, if you will. And as I said, I don't think it's aged particularly well. Though the way Bernard Rose approached it, it had a very scholarly, almost documentary type feel to it, which I think was deliberate. This movie doesn't, and that's okay. Though this movie is also not particularly scary. I wish it were. I alluded to some things that would have helped, but it's just not a terribly atmospheric movie, nor does it take enough chances with the material to be really scary. There are some interesting moments that could have been used in a body horror-esque sense. The sting from the bee, for instance, that never quite pay off. It's a watchable movie. It's certainly worth seeing, but, and I should say, I think it's a worthy continuation of the Candyman series. Certainly the best sequel to Candyman yet, but it's got a few problems. So what do you think? This is Brian with ScreenFiles.com in review. Do you agree, disagree? Let me know down below. And as usual, consider a like or a follow. Peace.